Chapter 2. In the beginning, the interrelationship of money, gold, and taxes in the U.S.
In modern life, money seems to surround us. We rarely possess as much of it as we wish, but it's still everywhere we look. It's in our pockets and purses in the form of cash and credit cards. It flows steadily through registers and kiosks at our local stores. It's stored in gift cards and on our phones and services like Apple Pay. It's in our bank accounts, retirement accounts, and Venmo accounts. It flows endlessly through payrolls and the internet. Like an ocean current, it moves in vast amounts overseas and around the world. In fact, the origin of the word currency comes from the Latin currere, which means to run or to flow. Something so ubiquitous is easy to take for granted. Modern money feels so sturdy and important that it's easy to forget how volatile and uncertain money has been throughout most of human history. It's also easy to forget that, technically speaking, it's not even real. Simply put, money is an agreed-upon legal fiction, based upon the trust between people within a society to honor the value of the type of money chosen, so that it might function as a viable and effective medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. What we all have done, as a country, is collectively agreed on the use of an item as money. But it has been a long and arduous process to get where we are today, and the founders of our nation worked through myriad challenges to lay a solid foundation for monetary policy. Economies are complex and puzzling paradigms, and the founders were unclear about what steps should be taken to pay the Union's bills and the repercussions of any steps they might take. More directly, the founders did not deeply understand what elements were needed to produce a vibrant economy, and in many respects did not fully comprehend or appreciate the role of money and the money supply, or their effects on the country's economy. Since the original establishment of the 13 colonies, the money used within the territories had been a moving target. It included currency from both Britain and other European countries. Coins such as the British pound and the Spanish dollar followed the dual metal standard for money, which required a coin to contain a specific amount of silver or gold. This bimetallic requirement was considered hard money, or specie. For example, the British pound, established around 775 AD in Anglo-Saxon England, had a value equal to 240 pieces of silver pence, which had a weight equal to 1 pound of silver. The Spanish silver dollar included 387 grains of pure silver, also called pieces of 8, which equaled 8 Spanish reales of precise minted silver. This Spanish specie, in fact, was the basis for the U.S. dollar, though the word dollar originates from the German word thaler. In Low Saxon, this is pronounced as dollar, which means of the valley, specifically referencing St. Joachim's Valley of the Ore Mountains in the present-day Czech Republic, where the silver for the Holy Roman Empire's coins had been mined. At the formation of the U.S., we agreed to value silver and gold, which were scarce, grant significance to coins that contained a specific amount of silver or gold, and use this money as our medium of exchange. This was the first step in establishing our idea of money on the gold and silver standard. But why do we value gold and silver? Why not palladium or rhodium or something else? When we give fictional value or an agreed-upon value to silver and gold, then the amount of these metals available in a country determines that country's money supply. The upshot is an entirely arbitrary money supply, which depends on whether more gold might be found at all. The dynamism of an economy, then, rests upon how much of a particular metal happens to be in that economy's region of the earth. This is a far cry from letting sound mathematical strategy determine the money supply for a country's economy. In truth, the founders did not know how much money should be in the economy. They could not say what size the money supply should be. Simply defining one's money supply, much less regulating it, is a tricky thing. For example, if commercial banks lend money under a fractional reserve bank lending premise, the money supply is increased. Let's say a bank takes in a deposit of $100,000. It then turns around and lends a fraction of that deposit, 9/10 perhaps, or $90,000. Both the deposit and the loan, believe it or not, are counted in the money supply. The bank has taken in money and given some of it back out, and the money supply has increased by $90,000. If you are making economic calculations based on the money supply figures, what happens when a depositor asks for their $100,000 back? This kind of conundrum played a role in the collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008 and the failure of Silicon Valley Bank in 2023. During the early days of the colonies, the size of the hard money supply was often restricted. Great Britain even went so far as to pass the Currency Act of 1751 to restrain the issuance of paper money, lending, and the establishment of new banks in the colony of New England. With the Currency Act of 1764, Parliament further extended these restrictions to all the colonies of North America. This, in effect, limited the money supply and attempted to protect British merchants from payments made in paper money by banks in the colonies, money which could devalue quickly. The resulting scarcity of hard money triggered the functioning of other commodities to be used as money. In the North, beaver fur functioned as money, and in the South, tobacco leaves, and later the certificates of tobacco leaves stored in a warehouse, were exchanged as money. Then, with the start of the Revolutionary War, the young federal government was desperate for cash and limited in options. As Danielle Bainbridge explained in a PBS Origins production,
once the 13 colonies became an independent nation, they didn't do away with taxes altogether because waging war and building a central government is kind of a spendy business. So they looked to other ways of using indirect taxation to cover these new costs and also to pay off some of the debts they had inherited from the Revolution.
After the war, states were bound by agreements made in the newly ratified 1781 Articles of Confederation, which placed clear and strict limits on the federal government's ability to implement taxes. During the drafting of the Articles of Confederation, the power of the federal government to lay taxes directly upon the people of the newly formed collection of states became a central question. In Philadelphia, as the Second Continental Congress debated and drafted the Articles of Confederation, 3 different motions were made to preclude direct taxation by the federal government, and in the end, direct federal taxation was not allowed. The dominant anti-federalists, the political faction that advocated for a small federal government, believed that each state knew best how to tax its people, and they prevailed. Back then, in some respects, each state considered itself something like a sovereign nation. So true was this perspective that by 1780, each of the 13 colonies had declared independence from Great Britain and adopted a state constitution, a full 9 years before the ratification of the U.S. Constitution in 1789 and the formation of the U.S. as a nation. Vermont, whose territory had been claimed by New York, was so independent-minded that in early 1777, it declared itself the Republic of New Connecticut, then changed its name that summer to the Vermont Republic. Vermont in French translates as Green Mountains, the centerpiece of the territory's geography. As a republic, Vermont issued its own currency and remained an independent nation until joining the Union in 1791. As these new states coalesced around the Articles of Confederation, this agreement limited the means for the federal government to tax the people directly. Rather than tax the people, the Articles required the federal government to requisition the states instead, meaning the federal government builds states for government services based upon a state's population. In turn, each state could determine how to tax its people and collect the money under state law, to pay the federal government's requisitions. In other words, the Articles of Confederation provided the federal government with no means of directly taxing the people. However, the real problem turned out to be that the newly formed states did not view the federal government's requisitions as real obligations. Rather, the states considered them more like mere requests. So, from 1784 to 1786, the states only paid 23% of the money requisitioned by the federal government. In short, the struggling nation was broke. The truth is that governments have only 3 mechanisms to generate money to pay their bills. They can collect taxes, borrow money, e.g. treasury bonds, or print money, which we would now refer to as quantitative easing. With the rising costs of the Revolutionary War and the limitations of the Confederation's restrictions on raising direct taxes, the federal government tried to borrow money, but to little avail. So they instead looked to option 3, print money. And with this step, the federal government invented the Confederation's first paper money, the Continental Dollar. While all metal coins contained certain amounts of gold or silver, paper money derived value from either the premise that it could be redeemed for an amount of gold or silver in hard money, or from the government's promise that the paper would have value, which is known as fiat currency. Fiat in Latin means, "let it be done," an origin, as you might recall, from the opening of Genesis in the Bible, and God said,
"Let there be light."
Or in Latin,
"Dicitque Deus fiat lux."
and so it was. The Continental Dollar, the first U.S. fiat currency, was backed only by the government's promise. Our young federal government printed over $200 million in paper dollars to pay its bills. Unfortunately, the federal government printed too many dollars and grew the money supply too quickly, so people lost confidence in the value of the Continental Dollar. It is also rumored that the British covertly printed millions of counterfeit Continental dollars to further drive down its value. The nastiness of war knows no bounds. So the Continental Dollar fell dramatically in value against the metal coin dollar. It is impossible to determine the size of the money supply between 1789 and 1799, but the estimated rise and fall is over 240%, as if the money supply were rising and falling in hurricane-sized waves. This is an enormous percentage, especially when compared to today, when, over the past 50 years, the annual average increase in the U.S.'s money supply has been less than 3%. Under the radical money supply swings of the late 18th century, the economy of the U.S. struggled mightily. By 1789, the people had paid the price, quite literally. The Continental Dollar was valued at 1/1400th of the metal coin dollar, becoming basically worthless. The founders were acutely aware of these failures when they began to draft the Constitution and knew that changes needed to be made. For one, the government's tax capabilities had to be expanded. For another, the implementation of coins and money had to be controlled. Both points were the focus of extended debates at the 1787 Constitutional Convention. Alexander Hamilton, a Federalist, asserted in the Federalist Papers that
money is the vital principle of the body politic, as that which sustains its life and motion and enables it to perform its most essential functions. A complete power, therefore, to procure a regular and adequate supply of tax revenue, as far as the resources of the community will permit, may be regarded as an indispensable ingredient in every constitution.
James Madison agreed and wrote,
"Strike out taxation from the list of federal authorities, and states like Virginia will be open to surprise and devastation whenever an enemy powerful at sea chooses to invade her."
Recognizing these elements in the final version of the Constitution, the founders ended up providing the federal government with some taxing authority. However, they also inserted a strange clause with a direct taxation limitation by population. The new Constitution stated in Article 1, Section 8, "Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imports, and excises. Article 1, Section 2, complicated matters. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers. The confusion is further compounded in Article 1, Section 9. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid, unless in proportion to the census. Nevertheless, 9 states had ratified the Constitution by June 21, 1788, the minimum number needed to form the country of the U.S. and its new federal government, which came into being on March 4, 1789. Specific to money and currency, the Constitution called on Congress to have the power to issue money, and so it passed the Coinage Act of 1792. This fixed the ratio of standards for gold and silver at 15 pounds of pure silver to 1 pound of pure gold for all U.S. coins, officially placing the U.S. on a bimetallic standard. At that time, the money supply was so arbitrary that if by chance you had gold or silver bullion, you could take it to the U.S. Mint, and they would press the bullion into coin for you. The founders attempted to correct the errors of the Confederation by allowing for broader taxation and requiring a hard metal money standard. But in the whirlwind of starting a new nation, the vague terms of the Constitution appeared to have limited Congress's power to tax the people directly. The Constitution seemed to require that the federal government apportion direct taxes on the people through the states, creating a very unclear situation. So, in the early years, the federal government did not tax the incomes of the people, and instead chose to simply levy transaction taxes, i.e., charge import taxes and duties for its revenue and survival. Specifically, the federal government taxed imported items coming into the U.S., a choice which became the government's sole source of revenue for the first 70 years of the country's existence. The founders struggled to find a tax structure that effectively raised revenue yet was fair and efficient, all the while very aware, as Hamilton said in Federalist No. 30.
The conclusion is, there must be interwoven, in the frame of government, a general power of taxation, in one shape or another.
So the question remained, what should the nation do?